In this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to draw a shoe, starting off with a gestural line, doing some sighting, and then using a modified contour. So before I go do anything, I compare the shoe to a horizontal line. I hold my pencil out straight, my arm is straight, and I see the bottom part of the shoe is going to be where the ball of the foot lies. The heel is a little bit higher. When I do a gestural drawing, I hold my pencil in an overhand position. Here in this photo, you can see how I would grab the pencil. It's almost as if you were shaking the pencil's hand. That's how you grab it. So it's different than you hold it when you're drawing detailed work. So I've inserted a photo of the boot, and you can see that I'm laying out a very light gestural drawing. Gesture means just that. You're using like the gesture of your arm. Now I had to slow down this part of my recording because I draw this part really fast. So I draw this in about twice the amount of time. But in order to explain it, I slowed it down. Now I'm measuring the height of the boot, holding my arm out straight, pencil tip at the top, thumb at the bottom of the heel. I then rotate my arm, still holding my arm straight, and I see how long, where that measurement reaches. So I'm comparing the height of the boot to the length of the boot, and I discover that I need to make my toe a little less long. So I'm adjusting the length of the toe here, making it a little bit shorter. So now I'm just looking at that angle of the boot coming up there, and I'm always comparing things to, asking myself if they're horizontal or vertical. It turns out that tongue of the boot sticking up there is a horizontal. Now I'm working on getting that curve of that tongue of the boot, which is really tricky. Now we will be going over how to draw ellipses, but what you need to do is really use the motion of your arm. Now look how I'm holding the pencil grip way, way back. That's to give me more movement when I draw. And then I kind of flick my hand to get a straight line. By slowing down the recording, you can really see some more of the movements that I'm making a little bit better. So right here, I am working on that curve of the instep, and again, letting my pencil just kind of sweep through. Give this a try. This might be a really new experience for you. Then I see that the heel, curves up a little bit right there. And now I'm just working on that curve of the heel and working on making sure that heel is just a little bit higher than the front sole. And my layout, I call this a layout. My layout's pretty much done. So the gesture drawing part of this recording was slowed down to twice the speed as I normally draw. The next part will be sped up to half the speed as I normally draw. So keep that in mind. You're not going to be drawing as fast as I am now. This is me in fast motion. The next thing I do is I drop a vertical. I take my pencil and hold it straight down, and I compare what sticks out the furthest compared to a vertical. And then I actually just draw that vertical line on the paper. It turns out that my heel sticks out a little bit further, as you can see, than the top of the boot. Now I'm really looking at the negative spaces as I'm looking at the indentations um, on the sides of the boot, and I'm looking at that part of the heel that's been sewn on, and I'm trying to draw that angle just right. Here I'm looking at the curve of the sole of the shoe, and I see that it has a width to it. And now I'm working on that angle right on there, and I'm comparing where that end of the heel was in relationship to the that curve of the sewn on heel there. I see that the back edge of the heel curves up, and now I'm working on those little indentations. Again, I'm looking at the spaces between those grooves on the heel of the boot. And again, I'm seeing that the right side of that heel really curves up from wear and tear on these boots. Um, Looking at some of the marks of wear, showing the wood on the heel. Now I'm getting that curve in. And you can see I'm gripping my pencil now just in the same way I would hold it as if I was writing. So I've got my pencil gripped tighter, closer to the front for more control. But I'm still drawing my lines fairly quickly unless I'm getting into more detail. And you'll see that coming up. Here I'm working on the width of the sole. I see that it sticks out a little bit, and working on the shape of the tip of the toe. And I'm looking at how wide that sole is. I think I drew it just a little bit too wide, but I left it there anyway. Now I'm looking at the shape of the toe, and I'm working on where that toe part has been sewn on there, that area that has been added on. Okay, so looking at the stitching, I just lightly drew that on. I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on the details later. This is not the time to really work up your details. What I'm doing here is I'm still working on laying it out, but in drawing you always want to work general to specific. You get your big shapes down first and your details come later. All right, so here I'm just kind of blocking out the shape of the top of the boot. Now, unfortunately, I think you'll see in this video, I should have come up a little bit higher. That boot should have been a little bit taller, but it could have been the way I was looking at it too, because I was standing up and looking down. So that perspective will make the boot appear a bit shorter. Right now, I'm working on the tongue of the boot, and it really curves around there in kind of a parabola. You remember parabolas from geometry, or maybe you'd rather not. So the way to draw those, accurately is to kind of swing your pencil around them like you were on a roller coaster, and to draw it kind of quickly. All right, well, you can see I haven't started the laces yet. I'm still working on laying out the basic shape of the boot, and I do see a little bit, the other side of the boot. I do want you to draw your shoe or your boot in a side view. Now I'm taking a kneaded eraser just to clean up those initial gestural lines. So this is the time where I clean it up. I don't clean it up before now. At this point, I had stepped back from my drawing and I realized that the front part of the boot looked too short. So it's always important to take a step back from your work, and if you notice something's off, you should change it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of changing that curve of the front of the boot, and I'm shifting it around, as you can see, and I'm making that front part of the boot appear a little bit longer. So I'm fixing that curve right there. Now I'm putting back the indentations for that kind of rugged part of the boot there. Here, the sole has a few lines on it, so I'm adding those lines. Now I notice, that the line weight is thicker right in there. Here I'm working on stitching. So I actually, when I'm doing the stitching, I pretend that I'm kind of sewing it, and I kind of push down and a little bit harder where the thread goes in. Here you'll see I'm going to start very lightly. See how I'm lightly placing uh, the grommets, the little holes for the laces. So I'm making sure I get them all basically in the right spots and placing them evenly before I do any more detail work. Now, yay, time for the details. All right, so the laces are going to take a little while. you can see that I gave you a close-up view there of the laces so you can see it better. Uh, Now I have my kneaded eraser made into a little point, and you'll notice that when I drew the boot, I didn't really take the laces into consideration. I drew the leather through where the laces would be, and now I've got to go back and draw the laces on top and kind of erase some of the shapes of the shoes. When I'm working on laces, I'm looking at the shapes of the negative spaces between the laces, okay? So I'm really looking at the shapes, I'll say that again, at the shapes of the spaces between the laces, and I'm looking at the width of the laces, and I'm looking at where they are in relationship to those holes, the little grommets that I laid out. I'm looking at the angle of the laces to see if, you know, they're horizontal or they're a little different than a horizontal, a little different angle. And, you know, it's all about where things are in relationship to each other. So again, we're back to looking at relationships. And the laces are complex. You've got to look at the negative spaces between them. You've got to look at their relationship to where they are, you know, coming out of the grommets that you laid on really lightly. All right, so there's a little bit more negative space between those two laces. So I got the angle on there first. Here I'm drawing the grommet, getting that a little bit darker. The other thing, you know, well, here I'm just cleaning that up, erasing the line of the shoes through the laces because you can't see through the laces. Now I want you to see how closely I'm gripping my pencil. You see how close I'm gripping it? I also am working with a sharp point, all right? Now, one thing I do when I do detail work, you see, once in a while you'll see my little pinky. I use my little pinky and I kind of anchor it on the paper. So my hand isn't quite hovering above the paper. Um, and I make sure wherever I'm anchoring my pinky that I haven't drawn there yet because I don't want to smudge the paper. All right, so I'm working on the laces for the top part of the boot here, and they get a little complicated. Now, the photographs that you see are actually easier to see than what I was seeing when I was drawing, because when I was drawing, I had all the lights on my paper, so it would make, uh, you know, a good video for you to see. But as a consequence, my shoe didn't have quite enough light on it. All right, but anyway, sometimes it might be better to choose a shoe that's a lighter color, definitely easier to see than black. So again, I'm working on those laces, looking at the spaces between the laces, okay, and where they are in relationship to each other. That one kind of comes down, it loops around a little bit. I really do love those linear forms, and I love twisting and turning kind of lines. I don't know why. And you'll find that you'll be drawn, excuse the pun, to some some shapes or some forms more than others. There I was just, you know, working on those kind of loopy forms. Again, looking at the negative spaces that I can see. I can see a little bit of the wall behind them. Now for this black shoe, this black boot, it was a good idea for me to put the white paper behind it. It helps me see it a lot better. And I highly recommend that when you set up your shoe or your boot to draw it, just put some white paper behind it. Put white paper on your desk or your table or the floor where you have your shoe or your boot, because otherwise it can be really distracting. Now I realized as I was drawing that I could see that little grommet on the other side there, and I hadn't seen that before. So I drew that grommet there, and that lace kind of comes down and it loops around. And I'm making sure the outside lace corresponds to that grommet. And then that's the lace kind of flopping down there on the other side. And again, looking at the negative space between there. Here I'm going to finish up this grommet here. And you can see you don't see, when I lay out the grommets, I draw like the entire circle, but I draw it really light because when I go back and do the detail work, you don't see all the grommets, so you don't want to, draw them dark first. So in drawing, a couple things to remember. You work from the big shapes, okay? You kind of generalize, work on the bigger shapes first, details later, and you start light and then you get darker later too. Really, really important things to remember. Um, let's see, what am I up to right here? I'm working on that curve of the lace as it comes down. And I love that little curve there. When you're drawing laces, any irregularities that you can see make them a lot more interesting. The thing that makes the laces look realistic are the irregular placement of them in relationship to each other. Now you have to get the grommets in the right, you know, in the right place, and they're regularly spaced because of how the shoe's manufactured. But the laces will look more irregular. Okay, so now I'm working on some finishing touches here. I'm working on that, putting the stitching on, where the boot is kind of sewn together. Here I'm working on that curve. Now, after this video is over, I realized that that curve was like a little bit too straight, so I actually erased that. You'll see it on my final drawing, and I made it a little bit more curvy. Here I'm doing the stitching that I'm seeing going around. The stitching's really fun, but hey, let it wait till later. It's like dessert, you gotta eat your main meal first before you have your dessert. So there's a couple rows of stitching, and here I'm just kind of cleaning up that front toe of the boot, and again adding the stitching as I go. On a separate piece of paper, you might want to experiment with ways to draw the stitching before you actually do it on your shoe drawing. It's a really good idea to do that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, clean it up again, erase some areas, and I'm going to look at the boot overall, and I'm going to figure out, oh, here I'm still adding some more stitching. Anyway, I'm going to start looking at some of the wrinkles that I see. And still a little bit more stitching. There's a lot of stitching on this boot. So that's stitching. What I'm doing here with this stitching is I'm doing a light line first where the stitching is, and then I do the stitching on top. So that's a really good strategy for when you're drawing stitching. Do a light line first, and then do that kind of dashed line on top of it. There, I didn't like what I did with the stitching, so it's cleaned up. Okay, so this is where I look at the boot, I'm looking at the wrinkles, and look how light I'm drawing. See how I'm holding the pencil with an overhand grip again? And I'm holding the pencil further back so I can draw those lines really, really lightly, very sensitively as I'm working on the cracks of the leather. This is what I mean by varying your line quality. And then I kind of sweep over the entire boot and working on, these lighter lines for some of the texture of the wood. And now I'm darkening up some of the lines. Some of your darkest lines should be where your shoe or your boot touches the surface that it's sitting on. And right now, yeah, I'm working all over my drawing, and I'm trying to figure out what lines I can make darker so the boot looks more three-dimensional. And I'm pretty much done at this point. Just cleaning up my lines. And there's my finished drawing.